Welcome to US Can Tech. I'm here with Shahryar Shaghaghi.
Shaghaghi.
Shaghaghi, I'm sorry. You
No
know,
worries.
with a name like Shahryar Afshar, I'm actually terrible with names. I get that with American friends all the time. Their name is Mike or Tom or Harry, and Shahryar Afshar or Shahryar, and you spelled it differently than I do.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's either with a Y or an I.
a lot of other folks, when they came to the US, they spelled it the way you spell it,
Yeah,
with a Y. And for whatever reason, my parents decided to spell it with an I. So it still comes out the same. And people always say, I don't know if you experienced this, oh, what a beautiful name, Shahryar. It's so unusual, and they ask me
yeah,
about what it means and where it comes from. And it's a
yeah.
good icebreaker, Shahryar.
And
So I
and the
like
ones that the ones that butcher it, I just said just call me Sean.
Sean. I
Especially if
know.
I'm, especially if I'm going through a Starbucks or a drive-through McDonald's.
That's
Sean.
what I do. I am Sean at Starbucks. I don't try to, Shahriyar. There's not enough room on the cup on the Grande Mocha to write Shahriyar.
Yeah, exactly.
But Sean, and then sometimes when I say Sean, they say, how do you spell it? I go, it doesn't matter. You're never going to see me again. Just put Sean in my mocha so I can be on my way. But I do the same thing. So welcome. Thanks for coming. I wanted to talk with you for a while now. As you know, our platform is based on technology. Of course, I talked to some Canadian friends. There's a lot of Iranians active in Canada, but you certainly don't have to be Iranian to be involved in technology. But thankfully, I think I see a lot of Iranians advancing in this field, which is just mushroomed over the past few years. Just so much data security, data issues nationally, internationally, that the more professionals and experts we have in this field and companies are involved in protecting our data, I think the better. That you cannot get enough security,
Yeah,
and especially for the non-technical person, when you see all the data breaches and all the massive breaches, national, federal government and businesses, you kind of wonder what's the point of even having a password or protecting your data. It seems like it's all spilling out into the world. Whatever you have, if you have a digital footprint, chances are your data has been breached in some way.
correct.
So that's kind of what led us to this conversation. So I wanted to kind of hear, Shahryar, a little bit about your background. How did you end up in this field? Were you always interested in this field since you were a kid, or somehow events and circumstance drove you to this field? How did you get here?
Yeah, so since most of our audience are Iranians, I basically left Iran before the revolution in '77. I was in UK for a couple of years, but then moved to boarding school up in Connecticut, and I've been in New York City most of my life. Um, but I came here actually, interesting enough, to be a pilot. As soon as I got my high school diploma, I went down to a university in Florida called Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. They're the largest aviation school in the world. And actually during the Shah, a lot of Air Force and trainings for pilots were done in that school. So I started aerospace. I started flight program. Obviously, as you may know, unless you go to military, paying out of your own pocket for flight school is not cheap. And when revolution happened, that was a no-go. So I changed to aerospace engineering, which was the closest major. Right around early 80s, when I was about to graduate, I realized that there are no jobs in aerospace industry. At that time, if you look it up, aerospace industry was going south. So I picked a few classes in computer science and liked the program a lot. Actually got teaching assistant jobs at the university and got really busy. My very first part-time job was the programmer at NASCAR, which was, racetrack right near
Wow.
the school. So I was writing qualifying codes for calculating qualifying points for different drivers based on based on various sources of data that was coming in. So yeah, I've been in technology, I would say, 30 years or so. So had a good run. Very quickly after I got my master's in software engineering, I started with Anderson Consulting, or they call them Accenture now, the largest consulting. It was a good foundation for me to really understand how to help large organizations, especially that was the portfolio of our clients, complexities around how technology enables business in variety of ways. So I got really in the middle of a lot of transformation programs, and had some good experience globally. One unique thing about me, I've been to probably more countries than most people have. I've been to 147 countries.
Wow.
So travel for me is like my second I guess after Korea has been my second focus area, because I love to travel, learn experiences from all around the world.
Wow.
And I would say that a lot of my projects that were global gave me that opportunity to actually get out there and then explore. I actually, when I was at Citigroup, which was the only time that I didn't do consulting, I was at Citigroup for close to 6 years. I headed up their technology risk program. So I was responsible for a lot of information security globally for Citi. And because Citi at the time was the largest bank in the world, the amount of money that we spend in information security exceeded any other financial institution. That this is based on what the regulators were telling us.
Mm.
But during those, Citi operated in 153 countries. So I didn't go to all 153, but I actually did travel a lot because of Citi.
What year was that? Around what year?
This was in the mid 2000s, to be exact, 2006 when I started at Citibank.
Okay.
Yeah. So and then so fast track again. I've been basically in the past 9 months, as I'm kind of going through my curve downstream on my curve of career life. I started to look at a opportunity that showed up on my radar. Is there in the quantum computing space, and to your exact point, Shahryar, about data security and what are the challenges, and what should we do, and how far do we take it. It's something that we can obviously discuss during this conversation, but this is an interesting company, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. On top of what I'm doing with this startup, which is a lot of fun, which is in a new space. I also teach at Columbia University. I guess you see the background. Columbia University. I've been there for about 4 years. I lead their technology risk program, and pretty much, it's been a good experience on top of what I do on a day job. Sharing your knowledge and being able to really work with students. The program that I'm responsible is IT risk management, which is part of the enterprise risk management graduate program at Columbia. So,
wow, a lot to get here. So tell us about Quantum Xchange. What does the CTO do? What are your clients? What do the clients come to you for?
So let me, in a very high level, because I don't want to get too technical, then it would definitely get into a lot of weeds that we don't have time for.
Sure.
But in general, the computers that you and I use today, they use classical machines, as we call them, the classical computers. They use zeros and ones to process data, and ultimately that's derived from advancement in chip technology and basically transistors, and that's how we are able to use the machines today. And if you have a little knowledge of quantum physics, which is something that is not very easy to understand. So since I've been in this job, I just keep reading and I'm getting more confused. But they're amazing, by the way, since we are a Persian community, Iranian community, we're amazing top guns in this space. Some of them, Shahryar, and some of them, like there is head of Cisco research for quantum is a younger Iranian guy up on the West Coast. I met another guy who is in technology law, and he's got postdoctorate from Yale University, and he's also very interested in deep in quantum. So interesting area. I'm getting to know more Persians in the past 9 months because of quantum that I knew.
You can't miss us. Anywhere you go in a high level, and whether it's the head of cardiology for Johns Hopkins, or you suddenly see these Iranians that are younger and younger. Right. We remember, but that's good.
Yeah, exactly. So supposedly the quantum machines, and there is a race between various companies, including big names like IBM's and Google's and those Honeywells of the world in the US. And of course, if you do some research, you see Chinese are supposedly are ahead of us.
Sure.
They're spending 10 times more than us so far.
Wow.
In the States. They already established a quantum link from a satellite to a ground station. So when you ask the head of IBM, it was 2018 when the quantum computers would actually arrive. They call it a Q day, quantum day. He said that it was going to be about 10 years. Now we are in 2021, and their predictions, or not predictions, actually their announcements, that the same companies, including IBM, are going to roll out their first series of quantum machines in a matter of 3 to 5 years. So wow. It's not a fantasy anymore, it's real. Now, what's the difference between quantum computers and classical computers? The very high level, the processing power of quantum machines uses quantum physics principles, is using lasers and photons, as we call it, the light. Yeah. So the processing is not zeros and ones anymore, it's the light. It's basically, and actually one of the technologies that my company has more experience than most companies in this space is called QKD, quantum key distribution, which actually uses dedicated dark fiber and transmits data, which is purely on photons rather than traditional zeros and ones. Now, what does this do? This obviously creates an amazing, not even comparable speed of power between what we are used to today, even supercomputers, and what the quantum machine can do. I mean, as a matter of fact, if you do some research, I think it was one of the companies like Google or one of these organizations that did a simulation of pushing a mathematical problem into a classical machine, and it was based on its estimation, it was going to solve the problem in 150 years. That's how, this is a fast machine today. And they feed that same problem into a quantum machine, and it was able to basically do it in 3 minutes. Wow. So the machine, the speed of the computer, to the extent changes the game in terms of clinical research, weather forecast, AI, artificial intelligence. Imagine all of the speed and applications of it is unimaginable at this moment. And everybody is.
Yeah, I just have one question. So we've all heard about technologies that come and go, but by the time they come to market, it's something else. So there would be other companies that would obviously bring it to market, so you can achieve the technological goal, but by the time I have it in my hand, it could be 10 years or longer.
Yeah. I mean, the applications probably initially would be limited to some government research, areas that you have more control over, you know, and then applications would expand from there. But with all the benefits that you can imagine you'll gain from quantum machines, there's also a disadvantage of it, which is what we do today in terms of protecting the data that you talked about earlier in this call. Is what we know as encryption. We encrypt our data. Since any data that is classified, high risk or confidential, is using the traditional public-private key encryption, which is derived from mathematical models that is very hard to break with the speed of the computers today. So we've been basically in the last 30 years, you know, using these algorithms that are very much protecting our data both at rest and in transit. However, the bad news about quantum machines is that the power that they have is able to burn these algorithms that we use today to protect our data in a matter of minutes. And therefore, all of the public public-private key encryption mathematical models, even the inventors of those models that are actually advisors, some of the advisors to our organization have said that it's not going to be relevant anymore when the Q day arrives. And the problem is not like Y2K, where you had to sort of make sure that, you know, by the time the year 2000 comes, all of your applications are updated with those changes. The problem is that the bad guys are what we call harvesting attacks. They're actually stealing all of that encrypted data today. And this is the governments as well as, public. The bad guys are stealing that data today. And the data, as you know, with the public-private key encryption, the data and the key travel together. So the bad guy in the middle, through various methods, including side channel attacks, they grab that data, they store it in some place. Cloud is very cheap, right? So they store it in the cloud. And then guess what? When 5 years, 3 years, 7 years, quantum machines arrive, they are able to break that data, break that key, encryption key, and access to that data. So any data that today has any value in time, or any data, as we call it, persistent data, like for instance, your health information, your personal identifiable information, things that would not change over time. That data is obviously at the risk of being exposed at some future time. And that is why we are bleeding today, and therefore we need to do something about it now. So one of the things that my company is focused on is actually helping organizations that are transmitting sensitive data today to protect that transmission or that channel. And we have developed technologies that basically does two things. But on a mathematical side, we use any one of the existing we call it post-quantum crypto algorithms that is being evaluated, as a matter of fact, by NIST, which is one of the standards organizations by the government. So we can actually use algorithms that are designed so the quantum machines cannot break it. They don't use the traditional prime numbers, and the speed of the machine has nothing to do with breaking it. They use various mathematical models, different problem to solve. And we are using those technologies as part of our transmission, but we also are using the traditional QKD, which is the photon concepts that I mentioned to you. And combined with that, we've developed these appliances. So it looks like a router or a device we call it appliance, that sits next to your data center, attaches to your data center, maybe to a Cisco router or a Cisco encryptor. And we actually are in the process of building integrations with most of the networking companies. And so our solution creates a post-quantum key out of band in association with the primary key. So we encrypt the primary key, so we call it KEK, key encryption key. And what that does basically makes the intervention by bad guys to be able to, at some point in the future, break the primary key, impossible for them to be able to access that data, because they will never be able to synchronize the key that we have that is associated with the primary key. I just gave you a very high level overview of what we do. So we are probably one of the few companies right now that is getting a lot of traction in the marketplace, even at our size, by big names like IBM's and Microsoft's and Google's of the world, because we have a solution that is regulated from a regulatory perspective. We've already certified it through FIPS, which is a standard process, but at the same time we are able to deploy it in major production environments. And some of our larger accounts that started with some sort of a POC, proof of concept, are Verizon, and then we are also getting into some of the larger banks. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Wow. So there's technology, there's always a game changer coming. It's almost like it's a constant wave of game changing. And this technology sounds like it's going to be global. I mean, if it's instituted and sounds like it can be integrated within their existing infrastructure, then that's the solution, because you're not trying to get people to unplug from their systems. Right. You're trying to add to it, as you described it, so it can be better integrated into the future. Now, one of
the things I learned, just to add to what you just said, I learned early in my career is technology is never replaced, it's added on. So that's exactly what it is.
There's nothing worse than replacing technology. I mean, just as a consumer, and then I'm sure companies have the same emotional reaction to reinventing something. But if you can amend, supplement existing, as bad as it may be, to
Exactly.
gently make, it's a human nature, right? Technology, no matter how technology solutions we come up with, ultimately we're dealing with human beings.
Exactly.
Human beings make technological decisions. All of the breaches, a lot of them aren't technology breaches, they're behavioral breaches in practice, in process, things that we failed on as human beings. But technology is obviously meant to supplement our life and improve it. But I think you mentioned, touched on all the things I think I was interested in. How does the marketplace look at you? What are your primary kind of clients? Kind of trends within the profession and the industry. Do you, as a business, I'm just curious at how this, would there be a startup around you or some other technology that you would acquire or partner with and say, you know what, they have something that we can invent?
Yeah. So one, I guess, as part of my discussion with you, I didn't specifically highlight my role, and then I'll answer this question.
Sure.
So my role, we have amazing, scientists, quantum physics PhDs, and
Wow.
mathematicians that are sitting down and coding.
Yeah.
So my job is not that. We have a pretty solid capability in that space. They brought me in to really start looking at it from a standpoint of how do you define the product roadmap, the adoption strategies in terms of how many different ways do we need to package our solution. Maybe in the future we one of our services would be like quantum keys as a service, just like anything else that we do these days. So there are a variety of ways that we are looking at the marketplace that addresses short-term, middle, and long-term. So that's my primary role there. Obviously, because of being in this space for over 30 years, I have a lot of relationships that can help also get in front of the right organizations with the right focus, and on and on. But from a standpoint of where we are currently, we are building up our credentials with governments and banking sectors and telecommunication and on. As an example, with government, it's going to be announced very shortly, but we just brought Admiral Roger, who was, if you Google him, he's Top Gun military, head of NSA, and head of US Cyber Command. So if
Wow.
somebody on our board is Mike Rogers, you automatically establish that perception by your audience that if somebody checks the box at that level, then that means they got something going on.
Yeah.
And we brought the head of security for Cisco, 20 years at Cisco, as one of our other board members. So we are building up our credentials both from the top of the house, but also getting in front of some interesting clients that are right now US focused for now. We'll expand into other regions of the world. Obviously, as you can imagine, as much as organizations would be interested to protect their data in transit using us here in the US, there are governments and organizations outside of US that would be also very much interested. So we're getting a lot of pings from a variety of sources. If we are going to do acquisition, let's say what we do today is what we do, and we are evolving that product in various configurations. But I'm also a big believer of don't reinvent the wheel. So if we get into a particular space that there's already a solution provider, either through partnership or acquisition, that could be potentially some other things that will come on the radar. But at the moment, we're kind of very much focused into, we just closed Series A, and we are kind of trying to find some beachheads. By beachheads, I mean some names that are recognized in key industries as our clients, and then establish the credibility. And then, once we go into future phases of our startup process, then we'll be expanding into other areas.
Wow. You mentioned obviously the U.S. government. Talking with some Canadian friends, the Canadian government significantly helps their startups with millions in grants, technology especially. All as he put it, I had a friend in the Ministry of Economy or something. They participate in the startup's life at all phases, from beginning to end, I guess.
Sure.
Apart from the expanding your board and obviously government applications of
Right.
what you're doing, are there grants for what you're doing? Obviously, the U.S. government wants to support American companies given the competition with China and elsewhere.
Sure. Yes, the answer is yes. Actually, if you look at the funding associated with government spend, government is allocating more money in quantum space than a lot of other areas. So there's much more money in government than private sector when it comes to quantum computing. Now, the difference is a lot of money may be allocated to the actual building of quantum machines, which is not what we do. We are there to actually protect what the quantum machines are going to do the damage, right, in terms of security. So there's certain allocations there. Obviously, there are some proposals with three-letter agencies that we are working towards that would address exactly to your point. But also the difference is that we have a product that is ready to go into enterprise today. It's not like we are in the lab environment or R&D and we need money to kind of build it up. Our kind of goal is to get in front of some enterprise situations, because as you can imagine, you learn from those implementations what other areas you can expand on, or what use cases for banking versus telecom versus manufacturing is more attractive in the area. So those are some of the thoughts that we have related to kind of future next steps.
Wow. I think anyone that talks about quantum physics, I think their mind goes through a little bit of an adjustment, because it's not what most people talk about every day. But the way you describe it, it is most definitely going to be integrated into part of our life in some way, shape, or form, in a very drastic way. Sooner or later, either the government or the big agencies are going to be involved in it. It's going to affect our life, or the simple transistor-based, phones and computers and laptops that we're used to is going to change at some point. So the consumable market is going to be shifting in the next few years, probably to this more secure environment. I kind of was under the impression that, given so many data breaches in the world, that as an individual, not a company, I enjoy herd immunity, because millions of data information is breached. I'm just one of the, for someone to come find me to come, rip $10 off my account is very different than, but you're dealing with massive amounts of data, massive amounts of protection.
And I use the analogy with my students when I'm teaching related topics, because I teach part of my course is cybersecurity. First of all, your analogy related to our data is already out there. It's 100% accurate. One of the worst breaches that we had in recent years was Equifax. And Equifax, if they have our data from Equifax,
that's it.
What else do they want? Right?
My blood type is not on Equifax. I know that. My blood type is not there.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is, the analogy is what we call, sort of a risk-based approach. And that's what I actually teach. How do you actually take your crown jewel and sit it on your table in the living room and leave the door open? Although, there is ways to get to that crown jewel, but why don't you lock it up someplace put multiple locks on it in a safe deposit, safe, secure place? And that's exactly the concept in here. You want to look at the world and figure out, given that we have this much exposure, stop the bleeding, because the concept of continuing to bleed is not a good thing. So stop the bleeding. And how do we stop the bleeding is not a white paintbrush approach. It's very much focused from a risk perspective. So if I'm taking my laptop and checking into a hotel room and I'm doing a banking transaction, as an example, using my laptop, I would probably use my 4G or 5G of my phone as a Wi-Fi than hotel Wi-Fi. Those are some of the simple, no-brainer type of things. Or, if I'm looking at it from a standpoint of access control, back in the days when I was at Citi, we implemented multi-factor authentication. Now it's all over the map, right? So instead of having a user ID and password, which is what you need to also have what you have. Now, the concept is not new. If you have used ATM machines, which most of us have used ATM machines
Sure.
pretty most of our life, it's a dual factor authentication. You
Yeah.
go with your card, and you have to know your PIN,
Yeah.
right? Banking, you don't think the banks could have just looked at your face and spit
Yeah.
to you the money? They could have, but the fact of the matter is they wanted to add additional layers of security using the risk
Sure.
as a factor. So it's all about your risk profile, risk appetite, and how much you're willing to kind of change the game in terms of your defense mechanisms.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. The dual authentication, that seems to be the, face recognition, fingerprint, PIN, all of those things is the new normal. That's what we all have to accept, to make it a little bit more difficult to be picked out, for someone
Exactly.
to pick out our crown jewel from the herd of 100 million Equifax. You want to make it just a little bit more difficult, and at some point they'll give up. They'll try to move towards easier prey.
Exactly.
Right.
And
So
then security is always defensive and also offensive.
yeah,
So, on the offensive side, you need to think proactive, right?
yeah,
Like, yes, I know my data is out there, but, what are some of the aspects of suspicious activities, and you mentioned about, what we call user communities that sometimes intentionally, but by accident, may open the door to the bad guys by clicking on a link or something like that, right?
sure.
So there are ways that companies are implementing, even using AI, to be able to really look at anomalies in terms of behavior,
Right.
and being able to really identify those anomalies that the traditional rule-based engines could not. Because if I give you access, let's say Shahryar can access this application, that application is entitled you, so you're legit to use that application no matter what you do. But
Yeah.
if I then inject some monitoring based on behavioral changes that says, typically Shahryar goes and does these certain functions.
Yeah.
Today he's doing something different in this application, or
Yeah.
he's checking in at 2 a.m. Normally he doesn't check in on,
Yeah.
so things that goes out of norm,
Yeah.
those would be also red flags that somebody would intervene and start looking to see if something is happening. Those are some of the examples, that common sense examples that we actually apply in the world of security.
Yeah. And that's funny you say that behavioral and timing, and I kind of want to wrap this up because that technology is available in water monitoring systems. They use the time, they get smart about when you use the water, how long do you use it. They learn what's a toilet, what's a shower, what's a sink, and then they begin to detect anomalies. And if there is an anomaly in some ungodly hour, they shut the water down. That is to prevent a leak or a massive thing.
Sure.
So it's a simple thing, but
Yeah.
it's in every part of our life. Security, data security, water monitoring, God knows what. Child safety. Protecting your kid from predators online. All this. Your smartphone and your family plan usually has a family control mechanism, so you can protect your child from some of these things. Well,
Sure.
you know what? In some ways, I feel a little smarter, and then I also realize what an ocean I don't know about. So I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful, Shahryar, for making time for us to meet and learn a little bit about what you do. I think this might be an ongoing conversation because there is not a single day that goes by in our human existence nowadays where data security on a massive scale isn't in the news. Right? It's part of our life, whether you like it or not. I'm sure people like to not think about it, but it is very much part of the quality of life that we have and the security that we enjoy. But it's something we don't think about until that happens.
Yeah, and it's always been like this. It's
Yeah.
how to find that optimal point or the balance between convenience
Yeah.
and security, and
Yeah.
that's kind of how you need to live your life.
Exactly.
Figure out where's that point.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, technology is wonderful, but between all those data scientists and experts, you almost need a psychologist that understands human behavior and
Yeah.
what will human beings. How can you usher human behavior in the right way so it fits with technology? Right. Ultimately, it's all about human behavior. But I've learned so much. Thank you so much, Shahryar, for your time, and thank you for joining us at US Can Tech.
Thank you.